All right. We are ready to get started this morning. Good crowd. Great to see everybody this morning. Glad you're able to be here this morning. Mark, lesson 7 in your book. That's where we'll be today, which is chapter 8. Chapter 8. Quite a number of things to get through today, but we'll get there the best we can. So really appreciate all the classes thus far and the activity among everyone, and we want to keep that going as we continue on in this study, because that's what makes studies in classes like this work. And it's certainly not going to be just from this side of the aisle, in a sense, I guess, or at the podium, or however you want to say that. So we want to keep that going. Glad to have Caleb with me this morning. Thank you for being here with me and
thanks for asking.
And co-teaching this morning. So we spent some time together this week on this, and a lot of really good stuff there to pull out today. Obviously, we talk about this every time. We have mics in the audience for people that want to utilize them. For those who do not, no worries. Just speak up, and hopefully I'll be able to hear. Or if not, Caleb's got young ears, and hopefully he'll be able to hear, and we'll go from there. Before we get started, I have my mic runners. I believe Jonathan has a mic, Jason has a mic, and Dave has a mic. So if you want to speak in a mic, one of those three can get to you. And I would ask this morning if Jason would lead us in an opening prayer.
Lord, thank you for this day that you've given us. We're so thankful for just the opportunity to be here today, to have this study, Lord. And Mark, we just pray that you be with Caleb and Mr. Scott, and you just allow them to look through your text and just break down these events, Lord. And we just pray that we can be receptive and that we can draw out of it what you want us to, Lord, and that we can apply it to our life. We just pray that you be with all those that are here, Lord, and just pray for a good study. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, so this morning as we started chapter 8, what is, as you did your study, and this is just to everybody, as you did your study, what kind of stood out to you in Mark chapter 8? Where in relation to the overall chapter and the theme, what kind of stood out to you? Compassion? Okay, very much so. Flynn, appreciate that. Compassion, definitely. Overall, where we're at in things in Jesus' life, what kind of stood out to you in Mark chapter 8? What happens here?
Doesn't what's going to happen.
Okay, so we're at a tipping point, right, as you could say. And I think this is one of the things that as we got to 8, and, there are different visions of breaking down Mark, but I really believe, along with what was written here, that we're at that point now. Jesus, we're at that point where he's been trying to get them to understand who he is. Okay, and now we're going to start tipping at Mark 8. It's that, and then going forward, what's going to happen? Okay, what's going to happen with Jesus? And so we're kind of on a march now from chapter 8 forward. Okay, as Joe outlined in the first paragraph, we're tipping toward and going to slowly start moving toward Jerusalem from here. Okay, so he's been about his ministry, continuing to do that, but he's been about his ministry in a way to get his apostles, disciples to understand more about him. We're going to see that as we talk about that, but then at that point, he's going to tell them, like Eric just said, the future in regards to that, and it's really a steady walk to Jerusalem from there. So that's kind of a really, I think, a great observation point that's made And so that's kind of where we're at this morning as we go through this from an overall picture. Okay. So, any other comments before we get started into the questions about Mark chapter 8? Okay. All right. You ready?
Yep.
All right. Let's do. Why did Jesus feed the 4,000? Why did he feed the 4,000? What do you think? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he had a lot of compassion on them. They were following him for such a long time, and he didn't want anybody. He was thinking ahead. He wasn't thinking of just now. He was wanting to send them home with full bellies and to not let somebody fall out on the way home.
Yeah.
Thinking of not only their physical or spiritual needs, but their physical needs as well.
Yeah, exactly. So as Flynn said and Caleb expanded on, he had compassion on them. It says they'd been with him 3 days. Now, I'm sure if you're following someone like Jesus, okay, and you're going to leave, you might not always have everything you need when you leave because you really don't know how long it's going to be. I'm sure they had some things with them, or some had brought some things and they'd shared among each other. But now they're at that point 3 days in. They're probably out. They really didn't know, and they're out. And so Jesus has compassion on them, and that's a big deal. Jesus has compassion. All right, and so he feeds the 4,000, just like we've seen him feed the 5,000 previously, right? Okay. Something that I noted here, and I don't know to what degree, but it's funny. A lot of these people are going without food. It seems like, and what is one of the accusations about that the Pharisees have made against them? You do not. Right, Jesus specifically. Yeah, he's a wine drinker and he's a glutton, okay, and all these things. And I mean, they're going without, And also, he also talked about the apostles and or his disciples. Why do they not fast? Okay, so we know he said they don't need to fast when the bridegroom. You don't fast when the bridegroom is with you, right? That was the answer. But the point is that these people, while they may not have called that fasting, these people were willing to go without. They were willing to go without the basics of food and everything else to listen to Jesus. So I thought that was kind of an interesting point as well. Joe, you got something else? Mike?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to note where they're at, because he leaves Tyre and Sidon and he comes back to the area of the Decapolis here.
Right.
And I wanted to tie that point in, make sure we got. And I'm probably getting ahead of you a little bit, but
Okay, you wrote it.
in the 5th chapter, when he sent the demoniac possessed man, sent the legion, sent him to go to his town, he lived in the area of the Decapolis.
Right.
He said, go tell them what great things God's done for you. So his first trip to Decapolis, he cast out demons and gets sent away.
Yep.
His second trip to the Decapolis, he's got 4,000 people following him for days. And the scripture doesn't say this, but I just got to believe that one man's testimony spread around about hearing about Jesus, and that's the difference in the way the audience deals with Jesus as they come back. And once again, scripture doesn't say that. I'm just deducing that from the events that take place, but it makes a lot of sense that they're interested now because they've heard the testimony of the one who's been healed by Jesus. So,
yeah, I agree with that, and that deduction. And it also says when we start Mark, it says in those days. Okay, and so kind of going back what Joe's referencing in the Decapolis. How do we know that they're in the Decapolis? Okay. And so if you aren't looking at this with breaks in what is written and all that stuff with chapters, you go back to the previous, right? And where they're at is in Decapolis, right? And so we're going straight on in to this study that we're doing now, and it says in those days. So they're in the Decapolis, and so yeah, it's a great point, an awesome point that the one time you've been there before, the legion, the man with legions, you know, the demons, it was healed. And Christ cast that out and then told him to go and teach. Didn't let him follow for a reason. Didn't let him follow for a reason. Said, go and teach, okay? Show people, teach them. And so now we get there, and you got all these people. Yeah. That's correct, Decapolis, right.
Came from the Jews, now they're the Gentiles.
That's right.
Gentiles are not religious people as Jews. They believe in all kind of gods.
Right.
So you ask, I'm running out of food. There's several possibilities, but one is they came to hear Jesus. They were so wrapped up in him that they just didn't leave. They followed him a long, long way. This is the first time Jesus says that he has compassion.
Yeah.
Just to bring this up, I talk to a lot of people. I don't see a whole lot of people having compassion. Your wife has more compassion when she's talking to somebody than anybody else on.
Well, I'm sure she appreciates that. Yeah. Thank you.
Compassion means that you feel what they got.
Yeah. You understand. Yeah, it is. It's a really deep feeling. And it really goes to the next. And Brandon, you go next. Go ahead.
Lynn said what I was going to say. You know, Jesus was, I think we can deduce, Jesus was so magnetic in what he did, the way he spoke, how he healed people. The people were just drawn to him, and they wouldn't leave. I think we've all, you know, been in situations before where you just didn't want to leave something.
Yeah.
And these people were so much like that, like Flynn said. They couldn't leave him. It was a life-changing moment.
Yep. I agree with that. And so, in the last part of this section of Mark 8, 1 through 10, if you have other comments, please let me know. But, you know, one of the second question was, what does this feeding tell us about God? What does this tell us about God?
So, I mean, when we discussed, we talked about how if we're paying attention, excuse me, if we're paying attention, we can always see, or we can see how much God has repaid us more so than we ever deserve.
Yeah.
If we put ourselves into him, like these people did, they followed him, they listened to him, he will pay them back tenfold. And when you really pay attention, it's kind of mind-boggling.
It is. There's no doubt. God is always good, and he repays those who are always striving for him and making sacrifices in that. And, Psalms 34:10 says those who are his will not long for any good thing, right? So, if you're out there, and we get worried about things. We talk about it. It's like, I've got so much going on, and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I just don't know if I do this, what's going to happen to that, and all these things. And we get wrapped up in stuff that we're going to be talking about with Peter here in a minute. But, God, we have to remember God has compassion, right? God is going to look after you if you're looking after his will. If you're striving for him, he's going to look after you. Right?
It's also something that he tells us to do, is feed people.
That's right. Exactly.
So, we know from the least of these parables
Yep.
that's one of the things he does. And here he is walking the walk.
Yeah, that's right. He walks the walk. That's how he teaches, right? Okay. All right, any other comments we're going to get into the next section here, chapter 8, 11 through 21. Okay. So we get into this section and enters the Pharisees, right? Okay, obviously been there, but now the Pharisees came, it says, and began to argue with him. All right, so they begin to argue with Christ. And so before we get any further than that, Brandon just told us how magnetic Jesus was, how people were just seeking after him. They wanted to hear what he had to say. We know that people would say all the time, they would marvel at him, okay? And his wisdom and his knowledge and all these things, they want to hear him. But now we've got the Pharisees. They want to argue with him. So it wasn't everybody. Right? Everybody wasn't so enamored with Jesus. Now, maybe they were in a way, okay? because they were coming 100 miles or better to argue with him, okay? But it was a whole different perspective than what these people we're talking about are following Jesus, listening, seeking God. The Pharisees, are they seeking God? Now, I don't know every one of them's heart, obviously, and I didn't at that time. And we know there's a lot of defense mechanism built in here with the way in Judaism and being the chosen people and all these things. Well, I think what we see as we go along is that they were really more about themselves, right, than they were about God. And we talked about that last time from all the things they've built in and all the traditions that they've built in to carry on and add to God's word as law, which are not. And so they're really trying to build their own case, right, Joe?
I think he's also, Mark's intentional here. When he says he got in the boat and he went back to Dalmanutha or Magdala, or anyway, he goes back over on the southwestern side of the Sea of Galilee, and that would be considered more Jewish territory. So here he was in an area that would be considered relatively unclean because the Decapolis was the 10 cities that was heavily Roman influenced and that sort of thing. It wasn't that there weren't Jews living there. There were Jews living all over the known world at that point. But he's pointing out that a lot of Jews would consider just living there to be unclean, and you see their reception. And he goes back across the water, and immediately he's accosted by the leading religious figures of the clean, and they're angry with him, and they challenge him. So I think he's still, even going back to he's still building on chapter 5 a little bit, showing how the unclean in the presence of Jesus become clean, and those that we think are clean, they're not.
Sure. There's no doubt.
With their hearts, they show they're not.
There's no doubt. You're exactly right. The whole idea of clean and unclean is still right here. He's building on that, right? And he's been with the Jews. He's previously been with some Gentiles now, and now he's in the area of the Gentiles again, and then back up. So he's back and forth, and he's trying to bring it all together, right? That's his thought process. He's trying to bring it all together, or the point. So as the Pharisees come and argue with him, what do they argue for? What are they arguing for here? Okay, it says they seek a sign from heaven. Okay, they said, we want a sign. Well, what do they want? Has he not done signs? Has he not done miracles? Are miracles and signs the same thing? I say they are. Okay? So, what are they really wanting from him? What do you think the thought process is here? John Dean? Give him a mic, Jason.
Yeah, he's been doing signs, but I don't think they've got the feeling that it's from heaven. So they want something that's going to convict them and ensure to them that this is truly from heaven. I feel like they've already accused him of doing signs in the name of Beelzebub, in the name of Satan. And so they want something from heaven. Now, I don't know what they're specifically looking for, or what a sign from heaven might be. You're right. He's been doing these signs everywhere. But what does he say next? No sign shall be given to this generation. And so I think there's they don't know if they don't believe this guy is from God yet. And I think a lot of them never will.
Okay. Eric?
Well, aside from the fact, they've got concerns about losing their wealth and power and all, but what he's doing, if you think back to some of the prophecy, especially in Daniel, where you have this image of Christ, face of lightning, eyes of fire, legs like bronze, literally knocks Daniel to his knees. And, you know, that's not happening. That's not what they're seeing. And even if they knew that that was a, you know, more of an apocalyptic, you know, thing, they would still, I think, expect something a little more shocking and powerful visually, you know, that they could see versus what they're seeing now. So there's a lot I think going on with them, and maybe some of those, you know, prophecies about Christ are just, isn't this guy supposed to be like unbelievable, you know, just like, you know, Zeus or something like that. So
Okay, that's a good point. Good point. Both, John, I appreciate those points. You got anything you want to add to that?
Well, one thing I was just thinking of, we have to remember who we're dealing with here, and that's the Pharisees, and they're very hypocritical people. And they're trying to get Jesus to slip up, right? And so they have their own people who perform signs and wonders and things of that nature. And if you think about it, they probably know all of the things behind the scenes with that, maybe trickery or whatever the case may be. And so they're thinking, well, you know, we know what we do, so let's see if we can get this guy to slip up.
Yeah, I think there's certainly possibility of that in regards to this. Again, there's been some trickery. There's been some things that have done. You know, so, I mean, Jesus is only just healing lame and blind and, you know, people that can't speak, and he's, you know, doing these types of things and feeding people unimaginably. But that's not the kind of sign that they want, right? That's not what they're looking for. And I think that Eric kind of probably hits it a little bit on the head as well there, and John as well, in regards to that. And we'll probably talk a little bit about that a little bit more here in just a second. So do we have another comment before we move on?
Yeah, I was going to say, in Deuteronomy 18, the law told them how they were supposed to prove essentially a prophet. And it wasn't with signs. It was with what the prophet said coming true. They've actually seen that in that Jesus healed the man that they lowered through the roof of his house, and he told the man to get up and walk. And, you know, he's explained to them how this proof works because, you know, he's God and he created this proof text, right? And he told them, is it easier for me to tell you your sins are forgiven or tell you to get up and walk? Well, in the truth, none of that was really easy at all. But Jesus showed them that he was a prophet. And again, I think like Eric said, they don't want to listen to his, they want what they want. And we can be guilty of that too. We want what we want. We've got to listen to what God gives us, and God gives us what we need. And God, you know, Jesus gave them the sign that they needed, but they didn't like his sign.
Okay. Charlie?
The discussion about a sign, we've already discussed most of the point of this, but I rode a train from Tennessee to Mobile with Bob James and his crew, political crew, when he was running for governor. And we stopped at like 5 or 6 different towns, and I was privileged enough to be in his little quarter with all of his buddies. It's greasy in there too, by the way. But anyway, it was amazing that the signs that Bob would give out would be the signs that the representatives of his party who lived in these little areas were telling Bob, these people are worried about there's too many mosquitoes or whatever the thing was. Sure. So when he would pull into these little towns with him and his advisors, they would put together, the speech would be basically the same, but they would insert whatever it was that they thought would tickle the ears of the receivers. And so I don't know that I'd be ready to disqualify what the Pharisees were wanting to hear, but they wanted to make sure that the crowd heard those same things. And when they would ask a question like that, they were trying to push their position, give their position some strength. And that changes from group to group.
Okay, very good. Good points. So Jesus does what? Says, first thing he did was do what? He sighed. He gave them a physical, you know, I mean, it says a lot when when you're talking to somebody and the first thing you do is sigh at you, right? It says a lot right there. And he says, why does this generation seek a sign? And he's not going to give them a sign. He's not going to do it. Okay. So then we go into this idea of what he's warning about. All right, so he starts warning his disciples about what? Leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. All right? So what does that mean to you? What is explaining the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod? What is this? What does he mean here?
Adulterant.
A what?
It's an adulterant.
An adulterant.
They're both corrupt, and they'll if you mix with them, it'll corrupt everything.
Okay.
And it'll happen quick, and you can't get rid of it.
Yeah, exactly. Joe?
There's a notable difference in that Pharisees will not listen,
That's right.
and they oppose him at every step. Herod would listen to John.
Right.
It says he listened to him gladly, chapter 6.
Yep.
But it didn't change him.
Correct.
So you've got two types of leaven here. They're both leaven, but they're both wind up with a negative outcome. Those who refuse to listen are those who happily listen, but it's happy noise. It doesn't ever change their lives. And each end is the same, but the leaven is different. It looks different.
Yeah. So kind of back to what Charlie was saying, you come town to town and you got these Pharisees always plugging away at their little things. They're planting their little seed, right? They're pushing their leaven, and it don't take much. Don't take much, right? We know that about leaven, and we've talked about that, I'm sure, 100 times in your life. But, leaven grows from a little of nothing, and it just continues to grow, and it affects the whole batch when you're talking about dough, whatever the case may be, in regards to this. So, all he's saying is these little seeds they're planting can grow and grow and grow, and he's warning his disciples, you too can start looking for greater signs. You too can allow this to become you. You can become corrupt. You can become arrogant, hypocritical, and you will start building upon this traditions of men and following that instead of God. Right? So, there's also, in particular, I think it really kind of all combines the sign from heaven, that maybe they can become unsatisfied with the fact that he's just healing or he's just doing these things. They're looking for a greater sign, a greater sign. So you just have to be careful. It can infect, right? So then we get to the idea here. He's fed the 4,000, and we know that upon feeding the 4,000 at the end, how many baskets were collected? There was 12. That's right. There were 12 baskets collected, right? No, 7. 7 baskets. I apologize. I had that reversed in my head. There were 12 baskets collected at the feeding of the 5,000, right? All right? And now there's 7 baskets collected here, okay? So what is the idea here of the baskets and their numbers? Both the 12 and the 7. The 12 when he fed the 5,000, now the 7. We talked about this a little bit. What did you...
So I was trying to rack my brain a little bit as far as, I was like, well, 7 is holy and so on and so forth. But really, it has really nothing to do with that. It's the 12 tribes of Israel and the 7, was it nations of Gentiles?
7 in the Gentile, it represents the Gentile nations, okay? Because God told Moses in Deuteronomy 7:1 he would cast out these 7 nations from the promised land, okay? And so now, this 7 representing the Gentile nations, okay? The baskets themselves, what would be a representation of the baskets themselves? Any thought on that? What would the baskets hold? I'm sorry? The ends and pieces of leftovers. That's right. Particularly what was in the baskets besides the, what did the baskets hold? Bread. Okay? In particular, I think the bread is what was held particularly in these baskets. And so when you think of a basket, and whether it's got the bread or the fish really doesn't matter, but, you know, it represents a giving. It represents, okay, in this sense, a bread of life, okay? You could look at it in that way, okay? I don't know, Joe, if that's the way you were looking at it when writing this, but in the readings and study I did, you know, Jesus goes on later to tell them who he is. And what does he say I am? I am the bread of life, okay? All right? So when you put this all together, and you've got 12 representing the Jews, and you got 7 representing the Gentiles, and the baskets are being given to all of them, what does that say about clean and unclean? Is there any such thing?
It also says salvation's for everybody.
That's what it says. So there is no more representation by who you are as in your nationality as to whether you are clean or unclean. The bread of life is for everybody. The bread of life is for everybody. That would also infuriate the Pharisees. Oh yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
That first one was, correct me if I'm wrong, but that first edict that he did was to the Jews.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
This
That's
one
where the
is-
12
This one
was.
is to Gentiles, so
Right.
there's a distinct difference.
Right.
You know,
So
in
he's
Jewish
feeding
feeding,
Jews
and
first,
that's-
and there's 12 baskets collected. He's feeding Gentiles here, and there's 7 baskets collected. That's right. That's right. Okay. So, you know, I found it to be really, very interesting in how that was presented and how it was all brought together in a view by Jesus here, and trying to represent it to his disciples. Any other comments or questions there before we move into 8:22 through 30?
I think too, on the first one,
Yeah.
there's 12 baskets, so there's 12 disciples. And I do think there's a lesson there probably for them. I mean, each one of them.
12 apostles.
12 apostles. Each one of them had the chance to stare at that for a little while
Sure.
and think about it.
Sure.
You know.
I mean, the symbolism in here, it's just dripping in this text. I mean, it's just stacks and stacks and stacks on top of each other. And you talked about, you know, the first was for the Jews, so it was 12, and then 7 for the Gentiles. But also, the gospel or the word or those who would be saved was initially just for the Jews.
Right.
And so, that came first, at least in our reading, and then the
Yep.
Gentiles.
And then the Gentiles.
Think about how infuriated the Jews would be eating with 4,000 unclean people.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
These people have been out in the middle of nowhere for 3 days, and they're filthy.
Yeah. You reckon they were washing their hands before they
I
ate the
don't
bread?
believe they were washing their hands.
John Dean? Jason?
Not much of a baker for bread, but I think that leaven can or cannot be an ingredient in it, right? And
Yeah, that's what we just talked about.
yeah, and I find it interesting that instruction about the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod is in between the 4,000 scenario and Jesus talking about what just happened and bringing up what just happened with the 5,000. And to me, it just says, the Pharisees aren't going to be part of this community that multiply 7 loaves of bread into 7 baskets full of way more bread than we started with.
Yeah.
And Herod and that kind of leadership and heart and their ways, they're not going to be part of this community that takes 12 loaves and ends up with 12 baskets of way more than we started with. And so I think there's a little lesson in there of
Sure.
that kind of heart, leadership, instructor. It's not going to be part of this. This is very different. This is backwards. This is, we're not telling people what to do, we're doing for people,
Right.
right?
Good. Good point. Yeah, Lynn?
One of the things I think is getting accomplished here, Jesus has just fed the Jews. That's his people. Now he's feeding the Gentiles,
That's right.
which tells everybody's equal.
Yeah, everybody's clean in that sense, okay? There's no more of this distinction, all right? Exactly. Very good. Very good comments. So for time's sake, we need to move on to verse 22 through 30. So we have a healing here in Bethsaida and Peter's confession in this section. So what is unique about the healing of the blind man in this section? What's unique about it?
It takes two attempts.
So it takes 2 attempts, Eric says, for the man to be completely healed of this blindness. You know, the first thing I said, me and Caleb were talking about this the other night, and I said, what do you think? And he basically was saying the same thing. I said, I'm going to tell you, the first thing is, what did he say he did? He spit on him. Now, we've seen him spit on dirt and did it together and do stuff, but he spit in the man's eyes. That's the first thing that pops out to me, okay? And that's just, maybe just a funny in that sense. But, you know, it was a physical representation of what he was doing. He spit in a man's eyes. Not many people want to stand for that, okay? Evidently, this man didn't mind. Okay? He didn't see it coming, Joe said. Boom, boom. All right, thanks, Joe. All right, class is done. All right. So he does this, right? And then he lays his hands on him. And what's the first thing that happens? He says, what do you see? What does he see? Can he see clearly?
Hard to see out through all that spit.
Yeah, that's probably what it was. It was hard. What? He said it was blurred. He said, well, I see men, but they're like what? Okay? They're like trees. And then he lays his hands on him again. And then what happens? Completely cleared. Why in the world did it take 2 attempts for Jesus to do this? I'm just asking the question. What kind of lesson is it? It's a lesson, that's right. What kind of lesson? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Okay?
They can't. They don't understand everything. It's not clear to them
Okay?
right now. You know, so it's just to his apostles. And
Everything is not clear to
nothing's
them.
clear yet. And
Yeah.
so, but eventually it will.
Yeah, so it's kind of murky right now, right? It's kind of clouded. It's kind of blurry. But eventually, it's going to be clear. Right, like in just a few verses, right. Really good points. You know, there's some other people that attribute this to possibly the Pharisees and their, all this, you know, the fact that they can't see it and things of that nature. But I think overall, it's, I don't agree with that precept at all. But if you read on that, you'll find that out there. But I think this is certainly about, they just don't quite understand yet, right? All right? The lesson is just, it's coming along, but it's murky. And so, you know, they had to think this has never happened before. The disciples, those closest to him, they had to think, why didn't he just clear up like he always did? Right? I mean, that's what I would think. So I think it's a really good lesson in regards to that. Okay? So, where does Jesus go after the healing? I heard it. Caesarea Philippi, right? Okay. So, what's the significance of this city? What is the significance of Caesarea Philippi? All right, Miss Jane over here. You want a mic or no? Capital of Judea. Okay, it's where Jesus reveals his identity first. Hasn't done that yet. Okay. Okay. Okay, so several things. Some other history of this area okay, as well. And those are good points, very good points, okay. It was named after Herod Philip. His father was Herod the Great. He built a temple there, okay. This is a marginal city, or locate, a village, okay. This is on the outskirts. This is in the mountains. This is not a major city. This is off to itself. It was really nothing in the eyes of everyone until Herod built a temple there. And then Philip, his son, took a special interest in this location, okay, in the village, and he enlarged it. And eventually, he attached his name to that of Caesar, okay, so Caesarea Philippi is how it became named. And so he could set it apart. Also, I think there was another city similar to this in name, and he wanted to make sure it didn't stand for that, or he wanted to separate it from that as well. It was also previously occupied. It was given to the tribe of Naphtali, okay? And as Ms. Jane said, Jesus is only recorded going there once, okay? Again, I think it's important that Jesus goes there one time to an area in the mountains. Now, I don't know, maybe he's going, we see Jesus go into the mountains often and take certain, disciples or whatever, and he goes there because of the peace, that there may be in a location like that. Maybe he's going there to pray, maybe he's going there, to get away for a minute. All these things, he's talking to his apostles, okay, his disciples, all right, in that sense. So, he uses this time wisely in this area, okay? So who do people think that Jesus was? What does it say? Who do they think he was? Who? A prophet? Who else? John the Baptist. Who else? Elijah. Okay. So people are thinking these folks come back, all right, or he's a prophet that has been sent. Okay? So, with that being said, he says, who do you think I am? What does Peter say? Yeah, you're the Christ. You're the Son of God. And Jesus is like, yes. Yes. So it's the first time that we see that happen. Yes, Dave?
We see in one of the other gospel accounts from our Wednesday night class when we watch the video and see him come into a place full of idols, idolatry, and then Peter's full answer is captured in another gospel. It says, you're the Son of the living God, as opposed to the dead idols.
Sure. Yeah, great point. And we see in Matthew 16, and I was going to read this, but we don't have time now. Matthew 16 and 9:22, we see him represented here as the Son of the living God that you just talked about, Dave. And then we also see him represented as what in Luke 9:22. It's the full encompassing of who he is. The what? Okay, the Son, the Christ, we see that. The Son of the living God. And in Luke 9:22, he says he's the Son of man. That's right, Son of man. So he's represented in a full gamut of who he is, right? Okay? This is who you are. All right, so lastly, in verses 31 through 38, Jesus goes on to explain his mission and the cost of discipleship. What did Jesus begin to teach? So from here on, we start a tilt. We start a tilt from here to Jerusalem. What does he teach them? What does he say here? Okay, you're going to suffer. You're going to be rejected. You're going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die, and I'm going to be resurrected. These are the things he tells them. So this is the first time he's told them this. So it's got to be a shock to the system. Shock to the system. Yes.
One good way of seeing Mark is seeing it as two chapters.
Yeah.
The first chapter is
The who, and now the why. Right. Yep. It's all about the why from now on. Yeah. Who? Sure. Sure. Yep, the who and now the why. Very good. So now we see Peter's reaction. What was Peter's reaction? This ain't gonna, whoa, wait a minute, hold on. All these things gonna happen? No. He takes him aside, he's rebuking him. Well, Jesus takes Peter aside, actually. Right, he's seeing men like trees. That's the point. And so he rebukes him, and what does he say to him? Get behind me, Satan. Now, man, how did Peter feel when he said that to him in front of everybody? It's pretty rough. Pretty rough. What do you think he meant by that? What was Peter looking after? Man's interest. Okay? He's looking at the present. He's looking at man's things. He's thinking about man. He's not thinking about God. He slipped into that mode. He's not thinking about God. And this is a public reaction that Jesus has, and it's a big lesson. Because then he's going to talk to them. And what is the cost of discipleship? You got to deny what? You got to deny self. You got to pick up your cross. You got to carry the cross that Jesus carried. So the bottom line is, from here on out, he's teaching them this aspect. And, and then ultimately, the last question was, note who is judged in the last day. And who is it that's judged in the last day? Yeah, whoever's ashamed of me and my words is going to be judged. And by the way, Jesus is the judge. So hopefully that's brought a picture to you today and really focusing on where they were sitting and what their thinking was. And, we've got to see it clearly, and there are times in our lives we see things murky. We see it blurry. We got to keep working to get past that. And we got to get clarity in these things. Okay. Anything else? All right. Well, I appreciate everybody this morning, and we'll moving on to the next lesson in lesson 8. Looking forward to Mark chapter 9 next time. Thank you. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Scott.